The impact of U.S.-China trade uncertainty is causing upheaval in manufacturing and supply chains for both countries. Google has announced it will move production of Nest out of China, while Nintendo is shifting some production of its Switch console to Southeast Asia. Meanwhile, Huawei has canceled the launch of a new laptop and is putting on hold production of personal computers. We want to talk about this with the panel right now, and I have to ask you, Tom, this kind of move from Google, will we see this accelerate?
So absolutely. So I think if you look at the prolonged trade war between the U.S. and China, you're going to increasingly see more companies move their manufacturing out of China. So a company I called Lovesac, which makes sectional and modular couches, talked about on their conference call earlier this week their ability to move all their production to Vietnam and out of China within 18 months. There was an article earlier this week talking about how Foxconn believes it can assemble all the iPhones outside of China. So I think that as this trade war progresses, I think you're going to see more companies move production out of China.
Talk us through the cost equation there, because obviously there's cost involved with moving the production. Is the actual production lower cost in a place like Vietnam compared with China at this point? So does it all sort of even out in the end? Within
apparel, I think you're already seeing that. So if you look at the tags of the clothes you're wearing, you're seeing a lot of Bangladesh, you're seeing a lot of areas outside of China. And the way I think about it for consumer electronics is that there's a bit of a ramp. So yes, you can move it out of China into Vietnam, and the CEO of Lovesac would tell you that Vietnam is where China was 30 years ago. So the costs are lower, the labor costs are lower, but the efficiency isn't there yet today. So I think that what you're going to see is maybe some initial cost benefit, but perhaps a degradation as you take some time for ramping up on the efficiency side.
I want to bring Scott into this because you mentioned in one case an 18-month transition period, but that doesn't also add into perhaps the quality issues and the ability to produce the kind of quality and content that manufacturers need for finished goods. Do you think the U.S. consumer would feel a pinch as this shift takes place if it continues?
Well, it sounds like there would be costs to shift your supply chain out of a country, and so does the company pass those costs on to consumers? What I find most fascinating about this story is that it's completely counterintuitive to President Trump's plan to bring jobs back to the U.S., right? That was the whole point of ramping up these trade negotiations, which was to get manufacturing back to the U.S. And now you have companies basically saying, well, fine, we'll leave China to avoid the tariff, but doesn't mean we're coming to the U.S. And here we have news that other countries like Vietnam are benefiting. So China doesn't benefit, but the U.S. doesn't benefit either. And so now you have to wonder, what is the goal of these trade negotiations? Because you can't really have a trade war with every country until they come to the U.S.
Right. And the other interesting thing, the country we haven't mentioned yet is Taiwan, I don't believe, which is another place where some of this manufacturing is going, particularly the electronics manufacturing. And so do you then get, even if the U.S. doesn't receive those jobs in that manufacturing, do you still get sort of a power shift within that region as other countries besides China get some of the economic benefit?
Yeah, and maybe that's another goal of the U.S., trying to limit China's power and influence in the region, because there's also sort of a militaristic growing military power in the South China Sea, areas like those. So it's not always just an economic issue.
Sure. So how does China react?
So I think that how China reacts is, you saw it within the U.S.-China trade war, where I think they said they're going to stop importing soybeans. So the big question in my mind is basically, what is the end game of the U.S.-China trade war? At one point in time, it looked like China agreeing to buy more of our agricultural products was going to be a solution. Now, I still feel like the ultimate outcome, which is perhaps a pipe dream, is that they'll honor our intellectual property to a greater extent. So in that case, I would argue that short-term pain is long-term gain for Apple. But I do not know, though, what on a near-term basis the quote-unquote end game is, as far as that it doesn't seem like them buying more of our agricultural products is enough at this point in time.
Yeah, and the IP thing is still up in the air.